Most of my work that I focus on, comes from origin stories and the values that have been passed on through these stories. My name is Randy Cook, Alapa. I am from the Kwakwaka'wakw, and I come from multiple tribes within the Kwakwaka'wakw, but my mother's from the Montegila, my father's from the Numgis, and I hold chieftainships actually from both, but I heavily focus on the Montegila side where my mother's from. A couple of years ago, on one of my excursions out into Montegila territory and looking at the impacts of, logging practices, I started to recognize we were losing our land at a very fast rate. We were losing our connection to these ancient old growth forests, and in the process of logging, I started to recognize a lot of culturally modified trees even being cut down. And what blows my mind, I think, more than anything, is we can look to objects in museums and look when they were collected from the turn of the century and what these objects mean. They're ceremonies, but what's older than that are these culturally modified trees who actually birthed those ceremonies. And these culturally modified trees should be protected. These are very, very monumental because some of them, sometimes you can count where the bark was harvested 1,000 years ago. So there's a lot of information in these, trees and in these sacred areas. But, going back to culture and stories, we would connect and pull the bark and we would use the bark for ceremony. But I started to look at it through a scientific lens also. And, as I was doing my master's, I was kind of doing more research, kind of taking Kwakwaka'wakw philosophy and these origin stories, but starting to integrate science and looking through the work of Suzanne Simard and tree communication. And what I found was there was so much overlap and it was just the same language. Everything was just bang on. And I thought this is really fascinating because I can tell my story till the day I die, but nobody's going to truly understand what I'm talking about when I'm speaking from my own personal history and the history of my ancestors and trying to understand our language and all of that. But the world can understand science and the language of science. That can be translated internationally overnight. So then I thought, okay, this is a great opportunity. I can use Suzanne Simard's language to start, balancing and talking about the work that I'm doing and bringing it together. And then people will start to understand and develop, a very clear perspective in saying, oh, so science is catching up to what the Indigenous peoples have always been talking about. It's not the other way around. We knew there was a language because we would go and communicate with the trees to receive songs and dances. But one of the things I thought was really fascinating was when we pull the bark to prepare cedar bark, regalia, things like that, there's a prayer that was said, and it was essentially like, I would breathe life into you as you breathe life into me. And, it was this connection between the tree. And there's other clan stories that talk about, spirits that would walk into the trees and the trees actually carried a spirit. So pulling the bark would allow that spirit to come out and be a part of the ceremony. So you're carrying that spirit with you also. And I think about the impacts of colonization and how it can jade us in a way also to really hang on to pain. And yes, we come from a very dark history as Indigenous people in Canada, but we also have been given the tools by our ancestors to move past it and to re-strengthen ourselves and to reconnect with the land and be the people that we're intended to be. And I really believe in that. And I think now is the time in my own personal healing is where I can look to what unity means to me today and bring people together and share in our value system as Kwakwaka'wakw people by looking at these origin stories and, taking the gifts of all of the things that my ancestors left for us and sharing that and, being the custodians of the land, but welcoming people to be a part of that land and sharing in our philosophy that they can take these values now and they can live by them too. And that can be our gift back to people, And I often, like I say, this is, the government talks about reconciliation, and nowhere in reconciliation does the government ever acknowledge land. They're not going to give our land back. It's not even not even a conversation. But we, the people, can be the act of reconciliation, and we can be the leaders in that also as Indigenous people. We don't have to wait for the government to give us a handout in order to start reconciliation. We can win the battle by actually just being kind and healing ourselves and sharing our philosophy with the rest of Canada to embrace them, so we collectively as one can look back to the government and saying, this is not sustainable anymore. You cannot treat people like this. You cannot treat the land like this.